Chosen one, stop right there. This message is not for the faint of heart. If you're here, it's because God has a revelation for you that will change everything. What you're about to hear will hit hard, expose deep truths, and may even break your heart, but it's exactly what you need for your growth. The truth isn't gentle. It doesn't ask for permission. It forces its way into the light, revealing what others tried to bury. This is the kind of truth that shakes your foundation and makes you question everything you thought you knew. The truth about you is louder than any lie they tried to build around you. But here's the thing, you've been running from this truth long enough. It's time to face the reality that your battles, your pain, and your resilience were never meant to be hidden. The people who mistreated you, the ones who plotted against you, they thought you would never find out. But the truth always has a way of finding its way to the surface, and now it's time to confront it. You're not here by accident. You've lived through the very thing God is revealing to you now, because you're meant to grow from it, to be set free from the lies that others tried to entangle you with. And believe me, the truth is never as comfortable as we want it to be, but it's the key to unlocking the power you've been holding inside. Comment 777 below if you're ready to confront the painful truths that are standing in the way of your growth. Stay with me, because what's coming next will open your eyes and your heart in ways you've never imagined. Now, ask yourself, what is the truth you've been avoiding that God is calling you to face? God's chosen ones, the painful truth you must confront for your growth. Your strength, the quiet power that you carry, often reveals far more than you might imagine. It's not loud, nor does it demand attention. It's something that emerges like the sun slowly breaking through the clouds after a storm. At first, you may not have even noticed it within yourself. Perhaps you never thought it was remarkable. But to those around you, it was like a mirror. And as you stood in your truth, that mirror reflected not only your own essence, but the fragility and insecurities of those who were unprepared to face them. This is why they were never intimidated by your strength. They were exposed by it. And although they may never admit it, the real reason they treated you the way they did wasn't because you were too much, too confident, or too different. The truth is far more unsettling and uncomfortable. You see, your strength didn't overshadow them. It shattered their carefully constructed facades. It revealed all the things they were pretending to be, things they were not brave enough to admit even to themselves. Take a moment to consider, what does it truly mean to walk into a room with the quiet confidence of someone who has faced adversity and emerged stronger? What does it say about the people around you when you show up as you are, without pretense, without trying to be something you're not? Are you not just existing as you are, or are you, in fact, a living challenge to the illusions others hold dear? You see, your presence has the unique ability to expose the cracks in the facades others hide behind. You walk into rooms with qualities they only wish they could replicate. You carry an authenticity that exposes their imitations. You bring a honesty that strips away their manipulations. You offer a resilience that reveals their fragility. And most of all, you possess a consistency that shines a light on their laziness. You are living proof that truth doesn't need to be rehearsed. You simply exist, and in that existence, you unmask everything they have carefully curated over the years. Consider the words in James 1-5, which promise, "If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives to all liberally and without reproach, and it will be given to him." In many ways, this verse encapsulates your journey. You didn't dress up your character, you didn't script your words, or calculate your every move. Instead, you lived from a place of truth, and that truth became your strength. It was not for show, nor was it for attention. It was simply who you are, and this very simplicity became a mirror to others. When you were real, they had no choice but to confront what they were pretending to be. Your authenticity, your presence in the room, exposed their weakness in a way they could not avoid. For years, they built a persona out of borrowed confidence, staged kindness, and performative morality. But when you arrived, you didn't even need to speak much. Your energy, your being, spoke louder than any words could. You didn't carry a script, nor did you weave together a performance for others to admire. You simply were. And the moment you showed up in your natural state, the very thing they tried so hard to conceal was illuminated. Your strength wasn't about making noise, it was in your quiet endurance, the clarity earned through disappointment, and the self-respect that took years to cultivate. Here is a question for you to ponder. What do you think it says about a person when their strength, when their real self, challenges the carefully constructed masks of others? The reaction you received, attempts to silence you, shrink you, or twist your intentions, was never about you. It was never about the threat you posed. It was about the threat you represented to their carefully crafted illusion of safety. And once you showed up being real without trying, their facade crumbled. This is why they tried to manipulate, to silence, and to make you question your own truth. And all along, it wasn't your loudness, your ambition, or even your success that caused them to react. It was your ability to be authentic in a world of pretense. Your authenticity felt like a spotlight shining on the cracks in their masks, the imperfections they weren't ready to face. Your strength revealed the truths they were unwilling to confront. Instead of addressing the insecurities that your presence exposed, they chose to blame you for making them feel uncomfortable. But in reality, you were not the cause of their discomfort. You were the reflection of everything they had abandoned within themselves. Consider the wisdom of 1 Peter 3:15. But sanctify the Lord God in your hearts, and be ready always to give an answer to every man that asketh you a reason of the hope that is in you, with meekness and fear. This is the essence of your authenticity. It is not about defending yourself, but about being so firmly rooted in your truth that no external force can move you. You were never a threat to them, not because you lacked strength, but because the strength you carried revealed everything they were pretending to be. You were a mirror that reflected what they were too afraid to see. And so, instead of being confronted by the insecurity you exposed, they twisted it into something negative. They projected their fears onto you, accusing you of things that had nothing to do with you at all. The truth they couldn't face was the very strength you carried. They feared the courage you embodied, the courage to live as your true self without apology. What is the real cost of building a life based on a lie? When you choose to live your truth, the world around you has no choice but to respond. And those who live with masks, who craft their identity out of borrowed ideals, will often react with hostility. But here's the thing, they weren't really attacking you. They were attacking the mirror you held up to them, showing them their own limitations. In Proverbs 12:19, it is said, "Truthful lips endure forever, but a lying tongue is but for a moment." Your truth, your authenticity will endure. The lies they tell themselves will fade with time. This is why you must continue to stand firm in who you are. You don't need to defend yourself. Your very presence is a defense of the truth. To them, your strength felt like a threat, but in reality, it was a reminder of everything they wished they had the courage to embrace. It stung them deeply, not because you were a threat, but because your truth exposed their deepest fears and insecurities. It is the reminder of everything they abandoned in themselves in order to survive in a world that praises illusion over reality. And now, every time they look at you, they are reminded of the gap between who they are and who they wish they could be. I leave you with this. What have you learned from the strength you've had to carry? How does it feel to stand in your truth, even when others may try to tear it down? You are not just surviving in this world, you are shining, a beacon of authenticity in a sea of facades. And that is the strength that will always remain. Your strength isn't a threat to their image, it is a gift to the world that will last long after the masks have fallen. One of the most difficult realizations you will ever come to is that you didn't outgrow certain people. They stopped growing long before you even arrived. The distance between you and them wasn't the result of conflict, arguments, or misunderstandings. It was created by something far more subtle and insidious. Evolution, your evolution. Theirs had come to a halt while yours continued to move forward. And when you continued to move, to learn, to heal, to mature, it exposed the depth of their stagnation. They had remained in cycles, in patterns, in comfort zones that required no effort and demanded no change. And when you began evolving, when you began to stretch beyond those same limitations, it disrupted the rhythm of their lives that had stopped growing long ago. They had settled into a life that was easy, one that didn't require confronting their weaknesses, their faults, or their untapped potential. Instead, they normalized dysfunction because it didn't push them to grow. They avoided accountability because it demanded effort, self-reflection, and courage. They avoided growth because growth requires a confrontation with everything one has been running from. Doesn't this challenge you to reflect? What are you avoiding in your own life? Have you faced the uncomfortable truths that come with growth, or are you hiding from them like so many people do? The truth is, when you began evolving, it wasn't an attempt to reject them. It wasn't an act of superiority or betrayal. It was simply the inevitable consequence of growth. You didn't abandon them. You simply refused to remain stagnant in an environment that no longer had room for progress. The environment they had constructed for themselves became too small, too tight, and too restricting for the person you were becoming. You were no longer comfortable in spaces where dreams were abandoned, where growth was stunted, where self-deception took precedence over self-reflection. You didn't leave them behind. They left themselves behind when they refused to take the steps forward with you. They chose to stay trapped in the cycle of complacency while you chose to keep moving. And when you kept moving, when you kept evolving, they felt it as rejection. They couldn't understand why you refused to stay in the same place with them. They couldn't grasp that your growth wasn't an indictment of their lives, but a reflection of your journey, a journey that was never meant to fit within the narrow confines of their expectations. In 2 Peter 3:18, we are reminded, "But grow in the grace and knowledge of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. To him be the glory both now and forever. Amen." This verse serves as a powerful reminder that growth is not just a personal endeavor, it is a spiritual command. You were never meant to stay stagnant. You were never meant to stay in a place where your potential was stifled. God calls us to grow, to evolve, to reach higher and deeper in our spiritual journey. So why, then, would you shrink yourself to fit in a space that no longer welcomes that growth? And yet, some will tell you that you've changed. They'll say it as though it's a bad thing, as if your growth somehow diminishes who you were before. But this is not the truth. The truth is far more revealing and, perhaps, uncomfortable. You didn't outgrow them. They stopped growing long before you arrived. And now, they are facing the harsh reality that their failure to grow has led to this gap between you. They may accuse you of being distant, too ambitious, too different, but all these labels are just their attempts to avoid the more painful truth. They let their dreams die long before you ever stepped into their world. Isn't it a harsh but necessary question to ask yourself, how much of your own potential are you allowing to go unrealized? Are you, like so many around you, simply standing still, waiting for change to come? Or are you actively pushing yourself towards something greater? In Matthew 25-29, Jesus says, "For to everyone who has, more will be given, and he will have an abundance. But from the one who has not, even what he has will be taken away." The words of Jesus in this parable resonate with a deeply spiritual truth. Growth is not just for your benefit, it's for the kingdom. It's for the people around you, and for your family, friends, and community who are watching you evolve. Your growth is not a betrayal, it is the invitation to others to grow with you. And yet, some will choose to stay in the safety of their comfort zones, unwilling to challenge themselves, unwilling to make the sacrifices required to grow. And when they do, they lose even the little they have. When you begin to grow, the space you once occupied becomes too small for you. Your evolution disrupts the stability they have relied on. Your willingness to change challenges their complacency. Instead of confronting their own stagnation, they project their frustrations onto you, accusing you of abandoning them, accusing you of growing too fast or too far. But the reality is, you weren't growing for them. You weren't evolving for their approval. You were growing for you. And this is where the tension lies. How do you keep growing when those around you choose to remain stagnant? How do you continue to evolve when those closest to you resist change at every turn? It's a deeply difficult struggle, one that requires incredible strength, courage, and faith in your purpose. For when you grow, you force others to confront their own unwillingness to grow. They must either rise to meet you, or they will fall behind. And when they fall behind, they'll blame you, not their own choices. It's in these moments that you may ask yourself, am I being selfish by growing, or am I fulfilling my purpose? If I grow, will I leave others behind? Or am I simply refusing to remain stagnant for the sake of others' comfort? The challenge is not that you have outgrown them, it's that they chose to stop walking before you even arrived. They stopped walking toward their own purpose, toward their own dreams, long before you found yours. They got comfortable in cycles that no longer served them, and when you kept moving, they took offense. But as Proverbs 4:18 wisely says, "But the path of the righteous is like the light of dawn, which shines brighter and brighter until full day." The path of growth is like a light, one that illuminates the way for others, even when they don't want to see it. In your journey of growth, remember that you cannot make others walk with you. Some will choose to stand still, others will fall behind, and some will walk with you for a time. But those who truly belong in your life will respect your growth, and they will rise to meet you, not because you expect it, but because your growth will inspire them to confront their own potential. You didn't leave them behind. They left themselves behind. So, as you continue your journey, ask yourself this: what parts of your life have you been avoiding growing in? Are you truly walking your own path, or are you standing still for the sake of others? And as you grow, remember, your growth is not a betrayal. It is the light that will shine on others, should they choose to walk toward it. The truth is uncomfortable, yet necessary. The hostility, the jealousy, the sabotage, the attitude, the tension you faced from certain people was never truly about you. Their anger, their frustration, their bitterness, it wasn't born out of something you did or didn't do. It wasn't a result of your mistakes, your character, or your intentions. No, the truth is harsher than that. You were simply the closest target to their unresolved demons. You stood in the wrong place at the right time, and because you were there, they projected everything they could no longer hide. You became the outlet for pain they couldn't process. Have you ever wondered why some people lash out at you for no apparent reason, or why their behavior toward you feels so disproportionate to the situation? These reactions stem from something far deeper than anything you did. The people who haven't faced their trauma, insecurity, and emotional chaos often look for an outlet, and you were that outlet, not because you deserved it, but because you were available. You were the mirror that reflected their unresolved issues, their pain, their frustrations, the very things they'd spent their lives running from, the very things they were too afraid to confront. This is where the painful truth resides. People who haven't confronted their own demons, whether from childhood wounds, past relationships, disappointments, or failures, tend to externalize their internal chaos. They often don't have the tools or emotional capacity to process the pain they carry, so they redirect it outward. In their eyes, you became the problem. Not because you did anything to provoke them, but because your very presence, your calmness, your clarity, and your direction shone a light on everything they tried to keep hidden. Isn't that an unsettling thought? That sometimes the people who lash out at us the most are simply struggling with battles we didn't cause, but are forced to endure. It's as if you were standing in front of a storm they had been carrying inside for years. And when the wind blew, it wasn't you they were really angry at. You were just the nearest surface, the closest person to their turmoil. They weren't responding to your actions. They were responding to their own unresolved pain. The wounds they never healed, the resentment they never let go of, the disappointments they never processed. You didn't spark those feelings. You simply exposed them. The Apostle Paul tells us in Romans 12:18, "If it is possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone." But sometimes peace isn't something you can control. You cannot force people to face their internal battles. You can't make them heal from their pain, nor can you take on the weight of their unresolved issues. And yet, you are still the one who bears the brunt of their frustration. But once you understand this truth, once you realize that their behavior wasn't personal, it becomes easier to let go of the burden of trying to make sense of it. Their hatred wasn't a reflection of your character. It was a reflection of their own pain. What makes this situation even more painful is that some of them may have recognized that you didn't deserve their treatment. They saw your kindness, your patience, your authenticity, and they knew you weren't the enemy. But their internal chaos was louder than any logic. Their unresolved wounds were so deep that attacking themselves felt too painful, too uncomfortable. Instead of facing those wounds, they projected them onto you. They used you as a stand-in for all the pain they had never addressed. In their eyes, you became the object of their self-hate, their anger, their unhealed trauma. You were their scapegoat. You were the person they could attack, because attacking themselves would have been too much to bear. How does it feel to realize that some of the pain people directed at you had nothing to do with you? That you weren't the one they were really angry with, but rather the target for the rage they couldn't express toward themselves? This realization doesn't make the pain go away, but it does shift your perspective. It allows you to see their actions for what they truly are, a reflection of their internal battles, not a judgment of your worth or character. In the book of Matthew, Jesus tells us in Matthew 7:3-5, "Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, 'Let me take the speck out of your eye,' when all the time there is a plank in your own eye?" This verse speaks to the tendency we all have to project our unresolved issues onto others. It's easier to focus on someone else's shortcomings than to face our own. Could it be that the anger people have toward you is really a reflection of their own inability to confront their flaws, their pain, and their unresolved demons? People who haven't healed from their past often use others as a way to avoid facing their own emotional turmoil. They blame others for their problems, they lash out, they project their negative feelings onto you, and instead of taking accountability, they place the blame on you for simply existing as a mirror to their internal chaos. It's not about you. It was never about you. Their reactions, their hatred, their jealousy, all of it came from a place within them that they hadn't faced or healed. You just happened to be close enough to expose it. But once you understand this, you can stop taking their behavior personally. You can stop internalizing their hatred, their criticism, and their anger. You can begin to separate yourself from their pain and realize that their issues were never yours to fix. Have you been carrying the weight of someone else's unresolved pain? Are you still holding on to the belief that their anger was about something you did, when in reality it was about something they never confronted within themselves? The moment you recognize that their hatred wasn't personal, that it was merely a projection of their own unhealed wounds, it becomes easier to let go of the bitterness and the need for understanding. You were never the problem. You were simply the trigger, the reflection, the mirror that exposed their inner chaos. And when you finally accept that truth, it becomes much easier to walk away, to detach from their emotional turmoil, and to release yourself from the burden of their pain. In Psalm 34:18, the psalmist reminds us, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit." When others project their pain onto you, it's easy to feel broken, to feel as though you're the one being crushed. But the truth is, You are not alone in this. God is close to the brokenhearted, and He will give you the strength to move forward, to walk away from toxic dynamics, and to find peace. When you can see their behavior for what it truly is, a reflection of their unresolved demons, it becomes easier to forgive. Forgiveness doesn't mean excusing their behavior. It means recognizing that their hatred was never personal. It was a symptom of their inner struggles, and it's something you don't have to carry with you anymore. So, how will you respond now that you see their actions more clearly? Will you continue to take their anger to heart, or will you choose to release it, knowing it was never about you in the first place? You can let go of the need for closure, the need for understanding, and step into the freedom that comes with recognizing that their demons are theirs to face, not yours. There's a painful truth that many people may never voice out loud. Your kindness triggered them more than your boundaries ever did. It's a truth that's hard to digest, but the reality is, when you chose to be kind, to respond with calmness and compassion, it often caused more disruption in their lives than any boundary you set. Boundaries, even though they may be difficult for some to accept, are at least something that can be understood. They are clear, they're direct, and they give people something to blame. But kindness is something entirely different. Kindness is unforced, it's steady, and it doesn't have the obvious power of an ironclad boundary. And that's where the real panic starts for people who thrive on manipulation, insecurity, and emotional games to feel in control. Why does kindness have this effect? Why is it that when you respond with patience instead of anger, with honesty instead of playing games, it completely shakes the foundations of those around you? Because it exposes them. It shines a light on the manipulation they rely on, the games they play, and the insecurities they hide behind. When you respond with genuine kindness, their usual tricks stop working. The chaos they try to create falls apart because they can't provoke you, confuse you, or guilt-trip you into reacting in ways that suit their needs. Instead, you respond from a place of steadiness, from a place of clarity, something they didn't expect. This doesn't mean that your kindness is a weakness, quite the opposite. Your kindness strips away their ability to twist your actions, to make you question your own intentions, or to control your responses. It removes the chaos and forces them to confront themselves. It's uncomfortable for them because they were never expecting you to be the kind of person who wouldn't be easily swayed or manipulated. Your steady, unwavering kindness is the last thing they want to encounter, and when they can't get a rise out of you, they begin to panic. They don't know how to handle someone who isn't playing into their drama. They can't predict your reactions, and that makes them feel unmoored. This is where the real challenge begins for those who thrive on emotional manipulation and control. Have you ever been in a situation where your kindness made others uncomfortable? Have you ever found that when you stayed true to your authentic self, others didn't know how to handle you? It's a feeling that can leave you questioning yourself. But what you don't always see is that your kindness is doing exactly what it's meant to do. It's holding up a mirror to their behavior, and that's something they'd rather avoid. When you stay kind, it forces them to reflect on their own behavior. It reveals their insecurities, their selfishness, their manipulation. Your softness reveals their sharpness. Your understanding reveals their selfishness. Your sincerity exposes their hidden agendas. But instead of them seeing your kindness as an invitation to rise to a higher level, many choose to resent you for it. The irony is that the very kindness they attack is the same kindness that protects you. It shields your spirit, keeps your conscience clean, and prevents you from becoming the very thing they wanted you to resemble. This is where the power of kindness lies. When you respond to chaos with calmness, to manipulation with sincerity, and to anger with patience, you strip them of their power. They want to see you react, to lash out, to meet their negativity with the same energy. But you didn't. Instead, your kindness exposed them for who they truly were, and that was more unsettling than any confrontation could ever be. Your kindness was not just a shield for your own peace of mind, it was a weapon that disarmed them in a way nothing else could. In Matthew 5:44, Jesus speaks directly to this, saying, "But I say to you, love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you." This command to love, to show kindness to those who try to harm you, isn't about excusing their actions. It's about recognizing that when you show kindness, you protect your own heart. Your kindness becomes a tool of strength, a reflection of something much deeper than any momentary emotional response. But why is it so hard for people to accept kindness when they're used to manipulation or control? What is it about genuine, unforced kindness that feels so threatening to those who rely on emotional games to feel powerful? The answer is simple. Your kindness exposes the truth they've been hiding. They've built their lives on manipulation, control, and drama. They've learned how to push people's buttons, how to create chaos to get what they want. But when they meet someone who refuses to be provoked, someone who stays calm and compassionate in the face of their attacks, they are confronted with the cracks in their own foundation. They no longer have the power to manipulate or control the situation, and that scares them more than any confrontation ever could. The kindness you showed wasn't about being passive or letting people walk all over you. It was about standing firm in your own integrity, even when everything around you was trying to pull you into chaos. It was about responding from a place of authenticity, not insecurity. And that's what made it so unsettling for them. What do you do when someone else's insecurities and emotional chaos don't affect you? What happens when you don't react the way they expect, but instead you show them a different path? Your kindness forces them to confront their own choices, and that's a reality they weren't prepared to face. You weren't triggering them because you were too nice. You were triggering them because your purity, your kindness, removed their ability to manipulate and control. Your kindness was a light shining in their darkness, and for those who prefer to hide in the shadows, that light is unbearable. It's painful. It exposes everything they've been hiding from. And that's why they attacked it. They resented your kindness because it showed them the parts of themselves they weren't ready to face. In Romans 12:21, we are reminded, "Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good." This is the true power of kindness, not just as a shield for your own peace, but as a way to overcome the darkness around you. It's not about fighting fire with fire. It's about standing firm in your own light, no matter how hard others may try to dim it. Do you recognize the power in your kindness now? How often do you find yourself questioning your own goodness because others don't seem to appreciate it? Do you see how your kindness is actually your greatest strength, the thing that protects you from becoming like those who try to hurt you? When you stay kind, even in the face of manipulation and emotional chaos, you are showing the world something they don't often see. You are showing the world that kindness doesn't have to be weak or passive. It's a tool of power, a force that cannot be easily broken. And while others may try to break it, to use it against you, the truth is, they can't. Because kindness, from someone who has every reason to be cold, is an undeniable force. It exposes what they've been hiding and reveals the truth of their character. So the next time someone attacks you for your kindness, remember, it's not about you. It's about the discomfort your goodness brings to their lives, because it exposes their lack of authenticity. Keep being kind, keep being steady, keep being the light they can't control. In the end, it's your kindness that will protect you, keep your spirit intact, and shield you from the chaos they try to drag you into. The truth is often more straightforward than we want to admit, but it's also far more brutal than many are willing to face. They didn't want to understand you. The reason wasn't that your truth was complicated, confusing, or difficult to grasp. The real reason they avoided understanding you was because doing so would force them to confront something far more uncomfortable about themselves. It's not that your perspective was unclear, it's that your clarity shined a light on their own discomfort and exposed truths they weren't prepared to face. Have you ever noticed how, when you speak your truth, some people become uncomfortable, defensive, or even hostile? It's not because they don't understand you, It's because your reality challenges the narratives they've been telling themselves for years. You see, every boundary you set, every truth you speak, every insight you offer exposes the illusions they have carefully crafted about their lives. When they look at you, they see someone who refuses to conform to the story they've been telling themselves, a story that protects their pride, shields them from accountability, and provides comfort even in the midst of self-deception. The harsh reality is that understanding you meant they had to admit they were wrong. They would have had to face the fact that the version of themselves they were comfortable with, perhaps the one they even prided themselves on, was built on lies, denial, and ignorance. That's a bitter pill to swallow, and many people would rather cling to their illusions than confront the discomfort that comes with self-awareness. Have you ever wondered what it is about people's pride that makes them so resistant to truth? Why is it that some people are so willing to stay in the dark rather than embrace the light of clarity? For many, this kind of self-reflection is the last thing they want. It's easier to dismiss others, to ignore their perspectives, and to build a comfortable world based on falsehoods. Your truth, however, had a way of cracking open those protective shells they had so carefully constructed. Your very existence, the way you lived in alignment with your values and spoke your truth, was a challenge to their carefully built facades, and that's why they rejected you. It wasn't about you being difficult or unapproachable. It was about them not wanting to face the fact that they had been living in a narrative of their own making, one that was easier to maintain than confronting the truth. In Luke 14:11, Jesus says, "For all those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted." This passage serves as a powerful reminder of the internal struggle many face when confronted with humility. How do we humble ourselves when we've spent so much time building up an identity, a story that shields us from our faults? Pride is a powerful force, and for many, it becomes a wall they cannot see beyond. They hold on tightly to their version of the world because letting go would mean admitting they've been wrong, and that's a fear most are not ready to face. What does it mean for someone to humble themselves? How can they accept that they've been living in an illusion for so long when doing so requires them to face their flaws, insecurities, and mistakes? Humility requires a willingness to confront one's own limitations and to be open to the possibility that we're not always right. But this is exactly where your truth becomes such a powerful catalyst for change. Your clarity forces others to see themselves more clearly, and for many, that's a terrifying experience. That's why the more you lived in alignment with your truth, the more uncomfortable they became. It wasn't about your words being too harsh or your actions being too extreme. It was about what you represented, a living contradiction to the excuses they used to justify their lives. Every time you spoke, every time you acted with integrity, it made it harder for them to keep believing the comfortable fiction they had built around you. Your actions and your words didn't fit the narrative they had created about who you were, and that's what made them uncomfortable. Isn't it fascinating how sometimes, just by being authentic, we can cause a stir in people's lives that challenges their entire worldview? Instead of embracing this challenge and allowing it to foster growth, they rejected you. They avoided your perspective because it required them to confront something about themselves they weren't ready to face. And so, they clung to their own false narratives, desperately trying to maintain the illusion of control and righteousness. But in doing so, they only revealed more about themselves, their weakness, their insecurity, their fear of self-reflection. They weren't rejecting you. They were rejecting the mirror you were holding up to them. This idea of rejecting the mirror isn't new. In James 1:23-4, we read, "Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in a mirror and, after looking at himself, goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like." In the same way, when people reject your truth, they are like those who look at the mirror of your authenticity and choose to walk away, ignoring the reflection of their own flaws. How often do we choose to ignore the truths that are right in front of us, simply because facing them is too uncomfortable. This rejection of your perspective wasn't about you being too complicated or unrelatable. It wasn't about your personality, your intentions, or even your mistakes. It was about their refusal to see themselves clearly. Your truth became a threat to the version of themselves they had created, the version they were comfortable with, and the version that allowed them to avoid the hard work of self-reflection. But the harder they pushed back, the more your strength became evident. Every time they dismissed your words or vilified your actions, it only made it clearer that their inability to understand you had little to do with you and everything to do with their unwillingness to confront their own fears and insecurities. Have you ever been in a situation where someone rejected your truth, not because they didn't understand it, but because it made them confront their own weaknesses? What does it feel like when you realize that the resistance you face is less about you and more about their internal battles? The irony in all of this is that by refusing to engage with your reality, they were only highlighting their own weakness. They weren't just refusing to understand you, they were exposing their inability to face the truth about themselves. Your clarity, your boundaries, your authenticity, these things became mirrors they didn't want to look into, and in doing so, they revealed everything they had been trying to hide. The harshness of their reactions, the bitterness of their dismissals, all came from their unwillingness to face the reflection you were offering. Your truth, your perspective, your strength in being authentic made their discomfort undeniable. It wasn't about you being wrong or misunderstood. It was about them not being ready to confront their own reality. And in their refusal to do so, they made their fear, their pride, and their self-deception painfully obvious. What are we afraid to confront about ourselves when someone else's truth shines a light on our own? Why is it that the most uncomfortable truth to face often comes from those who are simply living authentically without trying to cause disruption? The answer is simple: because truth, no matter how gentle, has the power to dismantle the walls we've built around our own insecurities. Have you ever been in a situation where someone rejected your truth, not because they didn't understand it, but because it made them confront their own weaknesses? What does it feel like when you realize that the resistance you face is less about you and more about their internal battles? The irony in all of this is that by refusing to engage with your reality, they were only highlighting their own weakness. Will you continue to live your truth, knowing that it might cause discomfort in others? Will you stand firm in the face of resistance, understanding that their rejection is not a reflection of you, but of their own unwillingness to grow? It's a hard truth, but one that's often painfully obvious. You were punished for the very things they secretly admired. Every attack, every snide comment, every judgment they hurled your way wasn't really about you. It was a reflection of them, their insecurities, their envy, and their unmet desires. People didn't punish you because you were wrong. They punished you because you were living in ways they secretly wished they could. And in this truth, we find one of the most paradoxical and painful experiences. When you live authentically, those who aren't ready to embrace their own potential may lash out at you for doing exactly what they fear they cannot. How many times have you been criticized or belittled for simply being yourself? How many times have you been made to feel less than, not because you were in the wrong, but because your very existence challenged someone else's narrative of what life should look like? Every insult, every hurtful word they used against you was not just an attack, it was an unintentional confession. They may have cloaked it in disdain, in mockery, or in judgment, but underneath, it was a reflection of their own unacknowledged envy. Your courage, the clarity of your vision, the sharpness of your intuition, and the unshakable resilience you carried, these were the qualities they envied. And instead of being able to confront their admiration and desire to embody those same traits, they masked it as criticism. When they called you too much, too overconfident, or too bold, it wasn't because you were a threat to them. No, it was because they recognized the parts of themselves that they had buried, the parts they wished they could show to the world, but didn't have the courage to do. You made them uncomfortable, not because you were living a life of excess, but because you dared to live in ways they had convinced themselves were beyond their reach. This kind of behavior is subtle but consistent. Envy doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wave a flag saying, "I wish I had what you do." Instead, it hides behind the mask of judgment, logic, and sometimes even morality. People will often paint themselves as the victims of your actions, making you out to be the problem when, in fact, you are simply the mirror they are afraid to look into. You became a mirror for their shortcomings, the reflection of everything they secretly wanted but were too afraid to pursue. Have you ever stopped and asked yourself, how often do people criticize me for things that, deep down, they wish they could do themselves? Their criticism was not born from hatred, but from a deep-seated fear that they might never be able to achieve what you have naturally embodied. Every time they tried to tear you down, it was really an attempt to reconcile the uncomfortable realization that they hadn't dared to embody the things that came so easily to you. You weren't the problem. The problem was their unwillingness to face the gap between where they were and where they wished they could be. There's something deeply human about the way envy works. It hides itself behind the cloak of moral superiority or judgment. Rather than admit they are envious or disappointed in themselves for not taking the steps you took, they project those feelings onto you. The criticism you received was their way of justifying their own complacency, their refusal to pursue their own greatness. Your brilliance forced them to confront their mediocrity, and instead of rising to meet you, they chose to tear you down. In 1 John 3:12, we are reminded, "Do not be like Cain, who belonged to the evil one and murdered his brother." And why did he murder him? Because his own actions were evil and his brother's were righteous. This biblical passage reflects the reality of what you've experienced. The attack wasn't because you did something wrong, it was because your goodness, your authenticity, shone a light on their own shortcomings. Just as Cain couldn't stand Abel's righteousness, those around you couldn't handle the strength of your light. Rather than rising to meet it, they tried to extinguish it. And yet, every time they tried to cut you down, every time they threw their criticisms your way, they only made your qualities stand out more. The more they tried to diminish you, the more you rose. The contrast became undeniable. The contrast between your vision, your courage, and their bitterness, between your authenticity and their masks. The more they tried to suppress you, the more your resilience showed through. It was as if their attempts to shame you only served to amplify the very traits they were secretly admiring in you. This is the bitter irony of envy. It is always ineffective. No matter how hard they tried to diminish your courage, suppress your vision, or dull your intuition, they couldn't take away what was inside of you. The strength they feared only grew stronger with every attempt to tear it down. They failed to understand that their punishment was meaningless, because the power of your authenticity was invincible. The greatness they resented could never be erased by their words, by their projections, or by their envy. They were powerless to take away what you naturally possessed. In Proverbs 14:30, it says, "A heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones." Envy, left unchecked, does not harm the object of its focus. Instead, it destroys the person who harbors it. They may have tried to make you feel less than, but in the end, they only hurt themselves by allowing envy to fester inside of them. Every time they criticized you, it wasn't just an attack on you, it was an attack on themselves, a reflection of their inability to face the truth about their own lives and their own potential. The unfortunate truth is that their words of punishment were, in fact, a confirmation of your greatness. Every time they tried to diminish you, they inadvertently confirmed what they couldn't admit. They admired you. Your courage, your clarity, your vision, these were the things they wished they had the courage to claim for themselves. But because they couldn't face the discomfort of their own inadequacies, they projected their jealousy and envy onto you. And in doing so, they only confirmed that your greatness was beyond their ability to deny. What does it feel like to realize that every attack they launched at you wasn't a reflection of your shortcomings, but a reflection of their own? How do you hold on to your truth when those around you are so determined to make you shrink into their limited view of the world? And how can you use these moments to stand even taller, knowing that their envy is nothing but an unspoken acknowledgement of your power? The truth is that their attempts to diminish you were never about you at all. They were about their inability to face what you represented, everything they wished they could be. And as you continue to walk in your authenticity, don't be afraid when people try to tear you down. Every criticism, every attack, every insult they throw at you only confirms the greatness they secretly admire. In the end, your authenticity is the thing that cannot be erased, not by their envy, not by their judgment, not by their criticism. Keep living in your truth, for it is your truth that will stand when all their attempts to break you fall away. In Romans 8:31, we find reassurance. What then shall we say in response to these things? If God is for us, who can be against us? When you are walking in your truth and living authentically, remember that God is with you, and no one can take away the strength He has placed inside you. The truth that we often shy away from is a painful one. They didn't mistreat you by accident. Every betrayal, every slight, every reckless action was not a product of impulse or ignorance. It was intentional. Those who sought to hurt you didn't just act without thought. They made a calculated decision. They measured you, sized up your presence, and made a judgment based on their limited imagination. In their minds, you were someone they could control, manipulate, or simply dismiss without consequence. They underestimated your worth, and in doing so, they thought they could keep you in a box, small, quiet, and inconsequential. They assumed you had no power, no influence, and no vision for the future. They didn't see you as a person with limitless potential. They saw you as a wager, a bet they were confident they could win. They didn't account for your resilience, your strength, or your resolve. They assumed they could knock you down, push you aside, and you'd never rise above it. How many times have you experienced this, where people dismissed you, thinking you'd never be able to push past their limitations on you? How often have you been underestimated, not because of any fault of your own, but because of their inability to see your true power? The root of their mistreatment wasn't carelessness, it was arrogance. They mistook your patience for weakness, your silence for ignorance, and your kindness for vulnerability. They believed that your quietness and composure were signs of fear, that your kindness was something to be exploited. Every time they ignored your boundaries, every rule they broke, and every game they played against you was backed by their unshakable confidence that you would never rise above it. They were sure of their ability to keep you down. But what they failed to understand was this: your life wasn't up for debate. You weren't a disposable object for them to manipulate. Their assumptions about you, about your potential, your future, were wrong. They didn't realize that your resilience, your timing, and your intuition were far beyond their comprehension. They thought they could stunt your growth, but in doing so, they revealed the gap between who they were and who you were becoming. This gap, the distance between their arrogance and your destiny, became clearer with every miscalculation they made. They were short-sighted and desperate, unable to see the full magnitude of your potential. Their actions, fueled by their own misguided confidence, did nothing but set the stage for your eventual rise. Their cruel attempts to undermine you, to diminish you, only served to strengthen you. Every time they tried to break you down, it was an opportunity for you to rebuild stronger, more focused, and clearer about your path. In 2 Corinthians 12-9, we are reminded of God's strength in our weakness. But He said to me, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly of my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may rest upon me." Their attempts to hurt you weren't able to weaken you. They only revealed the strength that God had already placed inside of you, the strength that would carry you forward in ways they couldn't possibly have anticipated. They were betting on you falling, but instead, you rose higher each time. The recklessness they wielded against you was met with endurance, clarity, and a quiet confidence. They didn't just lose, they exposed themselves for what they truly were. They were desperate, incapable of seeing the full scope of your potential. Their arrogance blinded them to the fact that you were on a trajectory far beyond what they could imagine. They assumed the odds were in their favor, but the universe had already placed its bet on you. Have you ever felt that way, that the very forces in the universe were pushing you forward, even when others tried to hold you back? It's as though, despite all their calculations, they were playing with a deck stacked against them. Their cruelty, their underestimation of your potential, was never about your flaws. It was about their inability to comprehend the magnitude of your destiny. When you rise, it isn't just a victory, it's a revelation. Every calculated attack they launched against you becomes proof of their failure. Each assumption they made about your future, about your limitations, about your inability to succeed, becomes a monument to your unstoppable trajectory. In Isaiah 55:8, we read, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord." The truth is that their limited imagination couldn't fathom what God had planned for you. They thought they had you figured out. They believed they could control your destiny, but they failed to see that your purpose was far beyond their capacity to measure. And every misjudgment, every attempt to push you into a box of limitation, only fueled your growth. The energy they poured into trying to diminish you became the very catalyst for your rise. It was their mistaken belief that they could hold you down that strengthened you, pushed you toward your true calling, and made you unstoppable. Their false assumptions became the stepping stones to your success. How often do we find that the very thing people try to use to harm us becomes the very force that propels us to greater heights? When you rise above their negativity, their assumptions, and their limitations, you show the world and them that you are not defined by their actions, but by the strength and purpose God has placed inside you. In the end, their predictions weren't just wrong, they were irrelevant. Their attempts to hold you back were simply distractions, meant to pull your focus from the future that was already unfolding. And when you rose, when you achieved what they thought impossible, it wasn't just a personal victory. It was a revelation to them, proof that no one, no matter how determined, can stop what God has destined to happen. In 1 Peter 5:10, we find hope. "And the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, after you have suffered a little while, will himself restore you and make you strong, firm, and steadfast." Their actions against you, their calculated moves to diminish you, were nothing more than temporary obstacles. What they didn't see was that God was using their opposition to make you stronger, firmer, and more steadfast in your purpose. What they intended to use to break you only built you up. Your rise isn't just about overcoming them. It's about showing the world and yourself that no one can hold you down when your purpose is aligned with God's will for your life. The moment they underestimated you, they sealed their own fate. Their actions only strengthened your resolve and clarified the vision that would propel you forward. When you rise, it's not just about defeating your enemies. It's about proving to everyone, including yourself, that you are exactly who you were meant to be, and nothing they do can change that. Your silence didn't confuse them, it scared them. When you chose silence, it wasn't a sign of defeat, confusion, or uncertainty. In fact, it was the exact opposite. It was the moment everything changed. The moment you stopped feeding into the chaos, stopped offering explanations, and refused to react emotionally, they felt it. They sensed the shift, an energy that they couldn't ignore. Silence, when it comes from someone who understands their own truth, is not emptiness, it's power. Have you ever noticed how silence often unnerves those who thrive on creating drama, conflict, or confusion? It's as if your quietness is a force that disrupts their whole system. They weren't confused when you went quiet. They were rattled, and they knew exactly why. For so long, they relied on your engagement to keep the cycle alive. Your frustration, Your need to explain, your emotional responses, they were the fuel that kept the game going. Your reactions gave them a sense of control. They needed your emotional investment to maintain their illusion of power. What happens when you stop playing along? What do you think it means when you stop reacting and they're left with nothing but their own manipulations to face? This realization hits hardest for those who expect constant engagement. When you withdrew and chose silence, you cut off their supply. The game they had built around you collapsed in their hands. Have you ever noticed how silence often unnerves those who thrive on creating drama, conflict, or confusion? It's as if your quietness is a force that disrupts their whole system. They weren't confused when you went quiet. They were rattled, and they knew exactly why. For so long, they relied on your engagement to keep the cycle alive. Your frustration, your need to explain, your emotional responses, they were the fuel that kept the game going. Your reactions gave them a sense of control. This verse isn't just about wisdom in speech, but about the strength that comes from silence. When you stay silent, you gain clarity. You show maturity and the power to rise above the chaos others try to pull you into. Silence isn't a lack of response, it's a decisive action, a decision to not give your energy away to things that don't deserve it. For those who are accustomed to creating conflict or stirring the pot, your silence is a loud statement. It's a declaration that you will no longer participate in their dysfunction, their manipulations, or their emotional games. Your distance disrupted their rhythm. They relied on your reactions to maintain their sense of control, but now, with your silence, they had nothing to grasp onto. They were forced to deal with themselves without distractions, without someone to blame, and without someone to push buttons. In moments of silence, they were forced to face their own intentions and behavior. That's a confrontation most people will go to great lengths to avoid. It's much easier for them to keep blaming you, to accuse you of overreacting or misunderstanding, than to look inward and face the chaos they've caused. Have you ever been in a situation where your silence exposed the truth that words never could? What does it feel like to finally stop reacting and let someone face the consequences of their own actions without interference? In 1 Peter 3:15, we are reminded, "But in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect." Your silence doesn't mean you lack a voice or that you are retreating. Rather, it's a deliberate choice to honor your truth without the need to explain it or justify it to others. Silence in the face of manipulation or criticism can be one of the most powerful ways to maintain your peace and assert your boundaries. What happens when silence becomes your response? Not out of fear or submission, but out of strength and clarity. It makes the person on the other side of that silence uncomfortable, because they can no longer manipulate the narrative. For the first time, they have to sit with their actions, and that's a punishment they were never ready for. They weren't prepared for the peace that comes with your silence, because they were used to feeding off your discomfort. What do you think happens when your absence of reaction makes them realize they no longer have the power to control your emotions? In the silence, your true strength emerges. Silence reveals character, and what it reveals about you is power, clarity, and maturity. Your silence exposed their insecurity, their fear, and their guilt. It showed them for who they really were, and more importantly, it showed you for who you really are. You were no longer bound by the need to engage in their drama, no longer caught in their web of emotional games. You freed yourself by choosing not to participate, and in doing so, you showed them the strength they could never take from you. In Isaiah 30:15 we read, "For thus said the Lord God, the Holy One of Israel, in returning and rest you shall be saved, in quietness and trust shall be your strength." The silence that comes from a place of inner peace, of trusting in God's plan for you, is where your true strength lies. When you choose to remain silent, to stand firm in your truth, without the need to defend or explain, you tap into a power that others cannot understand. And that power, that stillness, is what frightens them the most. Isn't it interesting how the most powerful truths can come from the places where words are unnecessary? Your silence wasn't a weakness. It wasn't an absence of courage or strength. It was an act of immense clarity, a refusal to be dragged into cycles of negativity and manipulation. When you stop engaging with their chaos, you take away their power. Their attempts to provoke you become fruitless because they can't control you anymore. Your silence becomes a mirror, reflecting back to them everything they've been trying to avoid facing. What would happen if, instead of giving in to the emotional responses others wanted from you, you used silence to show them your strength and clarity? What they feared most wasn't your words. It was the realization that you finally saw through them. Your silence was a mirror they weren't ready to face, and it terrified them. It wasn't about ignoring them or dismissing their behavior. Your silence was a declaration of your worth and your boundaries. How do you think they would respond if they knew that your silence meant they no longer held any power over you? In the end, your silence wasn't a void. It was the loudest truth they'd ever hear. The truth that you no longer needed their validation, their approval, or their emotional drama to feel complete. You had moved beyond their games, and that scared them more than anything. They couldn't manipulate you anymore because you had learned the most powerful lesson of all, that true power comes from within, and sometimes the strongest response is no response at all. They claimed you were difficult because you stopped accepting their bare minimum. This is a hard truth to face, but it's one that many of us experience. When you finally stop accepting the crumbs people were comfortable offering, suddenly you're the problem. It wasn't that you suddenly became hard to love, hard to talk to, or hard to understand. The truth is, you simply stopped tolerating the mistreatment, the disrespect, and the neglect. When you chose to value yourself, everything shifted, and that shift made them uncomfortable. For so long, you gave and gave, minimized your own needs, and overextended yourself just to keep the peace. And as long as you ignored your feelings, let your boundaries be crossed, and accepted the bare minimum, they were perfectly fine. They enjoyed the version of you that didn't require effort, accountability, or reciprocity. But the moment you started choosing yourself, choosing to honor your own worth, that's when the problems began for them. Your decision to prioritize yourself disrupted the narrative they had built, one where they benefited from your self-neglect. In Matthew 7:7, we are reminded, "Ask, and it will be given to you. Seek, and you will find. Knock, and the door will be opened to you." This verse speaks to the importance of knowing your worth, of seeking what you deserve, and not accepting less than what God has intended for you. When you start asking for more respect, more kindness, more effort from others, you are doing exactly what you are called to do. It's not about being demanding. It's about knowing that you deserve better than what you were given before. So, when you started raising your standards, when you stopped tolerating disrespect and began to demand the respect you knew you deserved, that's when the accusations of you being difficult started to emerge. The people who once benefited from your self-sacrifice suddenly found themselves unable to manipulate, to take advantage, or to enjoy the benefits of your generosity without giving something in return. They didn't like it. They didn't like that you were no longer bending over backward to make their lives easier. They didn't like that you were setting boundaries, sticking to your principles, and no longer allowing your worth to be compromised. Have you ever had to face this kind of accusation where, just by honoring yourself, you became the problem? How does it feel when you realize that the people who once took advantage of your kindness now resent you for asking for what you deserve? In Romans 12:2, it says, "Do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will." This is about transformation, about recognizing that you are worthy of better, and that it is God's will for you to not accept less than you deserve. Your transformation isn't about being difficult. It's about aligning your life with what you truly deserve, not just for the sake of self-preservation, but as a reflection of the divine worth God has placed in you. What happens when you finally stop playing by the rules that others have set for you? What does it feel like when you stop accepting their version of acceptable and begin living according to your own values, your own standards? It's difficult for those around you to understand. They don't want to face the reality that you are no longer someone who tolerates mediocrity, and they feel threatened by this shift. They wanted you to stay small, to remain complacent, and to ignore your own worth to make them feel comfortable. But when you raise your expectations, you don't push away the people who are meant for you. Your new standards are a filter that sifts out the ones who were only around because you didn't demand anything from them. This is the moment when the true intentions of others become clear. This is about transformation, about recognizing that you are worthy of better and that it is God's will for you to not accept less than you deserve. Your transformation isn't about being difficult. It's about aligning your life with what you truly deserve, not just for the sake of self-preservation, but as a reflection of the divine worth God has placed in you. The people who were only benefiting from your generosity, your emotional labor, your tolerance, they felt threatened. Instead of meeting you where you were, they blamed you for growing, for setting boundaries, for learning to honor yourself. How often do we allow ourselves to be shamed for doing what's right for us, simply because others benefit from our self-neglect? In 1 Corinthians 10:24, we are reminded, "Let no one seek his own good, but the good of his neighbor." It's a way of showing love not just for yourself, but for the people who truly value and respect you. What truly stings those who benefited from your self-sacrifice is the realization that the old version of you, the one who tolerated disrespect, accepted excuses, and absorbed mistreatment, was gone. You weren't the same person who bent over backward to keep relationships comfortable for them. You stopped explaining yourself repeatedly, stopped letting things slide just to keep the peace. This forced them to do something they didn't want to do. They had to either step up to meet your standards or step out of your life entirely. This wasn't a punishment. It was simply the natural consequence of your growth. In 1 Peter 3-9, we are encouraged, "Do not repay evil with evil or insult with insult. On the contrary, repay evil with blessing, because to this you were called, so that you may inherit a blessing." Your boundaries and standards weren't about punishment. They weren't about retaliation. They were about setting clear expectations and showing others how you wanted to be treated. The more you elevated your own standards, the more you filtered out the people who didn't truly value you, and the more you made space for those who would honor your presence and your worth. How does it feel when you realize that raising your expectations doesn't push away the people who truly care, but instead brings clarity to who is worthy of being in your life? The more you honored yourself, the more you revealed who was truly invested in you and who was only there for what they could get. Your boundaries weren't about pushing people away, they were about inviting the right people closer. Those who valued you, who truly respected your worth, were not threatened by your growth. They celebrated it. Those who only valued what you could do for them, they resented it. And their resentment was a reflection of their inability to see you clearly for who you were becoming. In the end, when they called you difficult, it wasn't because you were. It was their final attempt to shame you back into accepting less than you deserved. But you didn't fall for it. You walked forward, honoring yourself, and the ones who truly cared about you walked with you, ready to rise with you. Those who saw your worth didn't call you difficult, they called you strong. They called you wise. They called you worthy of respect. And in doing so, they proved to you that the people meant for you would always rise to meet you at your highest standards. Their biggest fear was that someone else would discover who you really are. It wasn't that they were trying to protect you, it was that they were trying to protect the version of you they had invented. This version, this carefully crafted illusion of who you were, was the only place where they had any power. And they needed that power. They relied on it. The truth was, they knew your value long before you did. They saw the way people naturally gravitated toward you, how your presence could shift the energy in a room, how your authenticity exposed their own performative confidence. They were afraid of being exposed, not because they would lose the relationship, but because they would lose control over the narrative. They needed you to stay small, to stay in the shadows, to remain hidden behind the version of yourself that suited their narrative. The moment someone else with influence, someone who could truly see, came near you, the truth would be obvious. It would be clear that you were never the problem. Have you ever realized that sometimes people fear your growth not because they care about you, but because it threatens their hold over the narrative? How often do we allow others to define us because we haven't fully recognized our own worth yet? In 1 Samuel 16:7, the Lord reminds Samuel, "But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him." The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. This verse speaks directly to the fear that others have when it comes to your true self. They may try to focus on the external, on your flaws or your quietness, but the Lord sees your heart, your true strength, and your potential. And that is what they feared. The world would see you for who you really are, and their manipulation would lose its grip. The truth is, your glow is dangerous to people who benefit from your dimming. They needed you to stay in the background because your light, your energy, your power was something they couldn't control. That's why they went on a full-time mission to mislabel you, misunderstand you, and misrepresent you. They didn't want to destroy you, they were trying to hide you. They were afraid that once the world saw the real you, the facade they had created would crumble. Your depth, your authenticity, your clarity, these are the things that threatened their carefully built illusions. Have you ever wondered why, when you started to embrace your own worth, others seemed to work harder to hold you back, to push you down? What do you think it says about someone when their greatest fear is that you will step into the fullness of your own power and truth? In John 8:32, Jesus says, "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." This is the liberation you're experiencing now. The more you embrace the truth of who you are, the more their grip on your narrative weakens. Your value was never the issue, it was always their fear of losing control of your story. The lies they told, the manipulation they used, the attempts to keep you hidden, all of it relied on the fact that you didn't know your own worth yet. But now, as the truth begins to leak through the cracks they tried so desperately to seal, they can no longer keep the illusion intact. Your energy is too loud, your purpose is too undeniable, your growth is too visible. What's happening now, as the world begins to see you for who you really are, is that their obsession with hiding your truth is making them more visible. The more they try to defend the lie they've built, the more they reveal their own fear. Their fear of being exposed for what they truly are. They cannot see you clearly because they've built a narrative where they are the ones in control, and they are terrified of losing that power. The irony is that the more they try to control the narrative, the more they expose their own weaknesses, and the more your truth becomes undeniable. How does it feel to realize that the more someone tries to keep you hidden, the more they inadvertently reveal their own fear and insecurity? Have you noticed how their attempts to suppress you only amplify your strength, clarity, and presence? You were never hidden because you lacked value. You were hidden because your value was too great. They knew that the moment the world saw who you truly were, their illusion would collapse. They knew that you would outshine them, not because you were trying to, but because your authenticity was stronger than their lies. They feared that once you stepped into the fullness of your power, they would lose control over your narrative, and they couldn't bear that. In Ephesians 3:20, we are reminded, "Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work within us." The power inside of you is immeasurable. It is not something that can be held back or contained by anyone's manipulation. They never accounted for the magnitude of your potential, and that was their mistake. They couldn't see that the truth about you was far more powerful than any lie they could tell. Now, the world is catching on. People are starting to see you for who you truly are, not through the foggy filter of someone else's insecurities, but through the clarity of your authenticity. As more people begin to see you for who you really are, the walls they tried to build to keep you hidden start to crumble. You've outgrown the version they wanted you to fit into, and you've stepped into your own light. In Isaiah 60:1, it is written, "Arise, shine, for your light has come, and the glory of the Lord rises upon you." This is your moment. You've been hidden not because you didn't have value, but because your value was too great for their limited understanding. Now, as your light shines brighter, the truth about who you are will no longer be hidden. You were always meant to rise, and now the world is catching up to the truth that has always been inside of you. In the end, the illusion they built to control you was never as strong as the truth that was inside of you all along. And now that the world is beginning to see you for who you really are, the narrative they created is falling apart. Your light is too bright for them to keep hidden, and as it shines, their lies lose all their power. In life, there are moments when we face misunderstanding, judgment, and the relentless efforts of others to keep us in the shadows. But what's important to remember is that the truth of who we are cannot be hidden forever. No matter how hard others try to make us small, the true value within us will always shine through. When you dare to look inward, to acknowledge your worth and the power within, you'll realize that no one, except you and God, can dictate your destiny. We are often tested when we step out of our comfort zones, when we no longer accept the bad, no longer allow others to manipulate our emotions and thoughts. It is in these moments that you will realize your true strength. When you stop accepting the bare minimum, when you decide not to let others undervalue you, you not only change yourself, but the world around you. Remember, silence, persistence, and the ability to see the truth for what it is are powers that cannot be defeated. You don't need to explain yourself. You don't need to react. All you need to do is live authentically with your own worth and let the truth speak for itself. Because when you live with sincerity and strength, others will no longer maintain their lies or judgments about you. If you found this message inspiring or motivating, please don't forget to like this video and share it with others who you think need to hear this message. Let's build a strong community where we share not only deep insights, but support each other on the journey to living our truth. Please leave a comment below, share your thoughts, ask questions, or tell your personal story. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any future videos, and if you feel this video has been helpful, consider supporting the channel with a super thanks. Your support means the world to us. Finally, I want to send you my blessings. Keep walking with unshakable faith in yourself and the strength within you. Know that every step you take is guided by a higher power, and you deserve all the good things life has to offer. May you always walk with strength, confidence, and happiness on your journey. Remember, you are the light that this world needs.